Today on Locked On Red Wings, Matthew Barzal got a contract extension, and does that affect what Dylan Larkin's number could be? Plus, lines came out from Tuesday's practice, and you don't want to read too much into it, but Pius Suter's placement in it is definitely noteworthy.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I am a podcast producer for WWJ News Radio 950. The podcast is called The Daily J. Scotty is the host of Locked On Tigers, who have just 3 games remaining. Almost there. And then also a freelance journalist for the Detroit News, but a doubleheader today. Really interesting.
Well,
and in the year high.
Yesterday as everyone's listening to this. But yeah, I got 3 games left, and then I'm like really excited for the offseason for the Tigers. I think they're going to do a lot.
They have to. They can't go through another rebuild, man.
Yeah, I think they're going to do a ton. I think there's going to be a lot of overhaul and a lot of like player personnel, front office movement, but we got a couple of games left. They've been winning some ball games lately too. We got to finish strong here, hopefully.
So yeah, and today's episode is going to be mostly news and notes. There was a Tuesday practice. Some lines came out. It was really interesting. Lalonde spoke to the media. And then also Matthew Barzal of the New York Islanders got a nice contract extension. We'll talk whether or not that moves the needle on Dylan Larkin. You know, those two players are somewhat comparables. Their point totals are pretty similar through the almost about the same amount of seasons that they've played. Slightly different types of players in the way that they play. Is Barzal's more of a playmaker while Larkin's more of a goal scorer.
Too, yeah.
But it is interesting to see as more players get contract extensions, Larkin's looming, and that number could shift depending on what contracts get signed before he inks his deal. So we'll talk about that in the second half, and then some news on the PTO front. Not the Red Wings, but other teams that have former Red Wings on them. We'll cover that in the later half of the episode, but we'll lead things off. We'll talk about, Scotty, the lines out of practice today. And it's a crowded Red Wings camp. There's still a lot of cuts to be made. So the Red Wings ran 5 forward lines and 4 defensive pairings in this matchup or in this practice. And Max Bultman of The Athletic tweeted it out. We love Max. And these aren't necessarily right wing, left wing. He's just listing the combinations. So don't think that these guys who are playing, if I'm reading it from left to right, as you hear it, that's not left wing, center, right wing. That's just the combination. And he has it listed as Bertuzzi, Larkin, Raymond. No duh. That's your top line. You got Perron, Copp, Vrana, the presumed second line. Here's where it gets interesting on the forward front. He has Zadina. Well, thank you, Scotty. This is going to make a very interesting. No, I mean, it is. No, but actually, when I say interesting, I mean, it is actually very interesting.
Gauges interest. It does.
It is gauge interest, gauging my interest. Zadina, Veleno, Kubalik, Ernie Rasmussen, Soderblom, and Smith, Suter, and Berggren. Now, he's listing the combinations. He's not necessarily listing what is, line 3, line 4, line 5. But if you were to take a guess between Zadina, Veleno, Kubalik, Ernie Rasmussen, and Soderblom, and Smith, Suter, and Berggren, what would you say are lines 3, 4, and then your excess line 5? And this is just speculation on our part.
I can only pick those 3. I mean, like, I think that to be honest, I think that the third line is probably actually going to be like none of those. But I mean, if I have to pick,
to pick.
I mean, I guess then I'm going Zadina, Veleno, Kubalik. If I have to pick one of those line as a third line, that's the one I would go as at 3. Then I guess I'd go. Goodness, that fourth line's tough between those two. Yeah. I'm pretty sold on if I had to pick whatever the line I would give the most minutes out of those 3. I would give Zadina, Veleno, and Kubalik the most. I guess I'd go. I don't know. The other one's really tough. That's a lot of kind of back and forth. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess the safer play would probably be Ernie, Rasmussen, Soderblom, just because like what you're getting with Adam Ernie. Rasmussen we saw in the second half of last year a little bit, and so far this year, kind of what he provides as a low line center, and then Soderblom, I guess, is more of a wild card. But that other line of man, I don't know. There's been a lot of people talking some smack on Pius Suter's name, by the way. That's like
Yeah.
been a in this fan base kind of,
Well,
and not
well,
super
hold on.
loudly or
Before you
anything,
get
but
into that, that brings me to my question because it kind of plays into exactly what you're getting
yeah,
into. Based on these line combinations, is Pius Suter's role on this team in danger?
no.
No. Okay.
No, I like no. I would not read into it at all. I would what I would take out of this is they want to play Suter with as many different people as possible so that the revolving door of the wings that are going to be played in those bottom six so that he can get some chemistry and get some experience playing with all of those bottom six wingers. I don't think this is oh my goodness, Pius Suter is like not going to make the team, or like Pius Suter is not gonna be a third or fourth line center for this team when the season starts. Like I feel pretty strongly that he still will be. I think they're just trying to mix and match who he's playing with so that when the time comes for that carousel that we've been talking about for a while, of maybe not as much assuming health, maybe not as much on the third line, but especially that fourth line, you're going to see a lot of kind of wingers coming in and out of that situation. I think they really just want to give Suter some playing time and some experience with everybody. I think it's more of that than anything else. It's a
Yeah.
preseason practice, dog. Like I don't think this is like, oh my goodness, he's whatever, the fifth line in a preseason practice on Tuesday, October 4th. Like Pius Suter's not going to make the team, or Pius Suter's going to be a healthy scratch this year.
I mean, I think what's more interesting than Pius Suter being on the fifth line is the fact that they continue to practice Veleno and Rasmussen at center. I mean, that continues to be something that they seem adamant that they want those two guys to be centers. And obviously, Pius Suter coming into the final year of his contract, I think will inevitably be the odd man out. I think at least as of right now, coming into the season, this will be his last year in the winged wheel. I don't see him getting an extension. So what
Yeah.
do you do with a guy that you don't see as part of your future? That's where my problem, my thing is not that Pius Suter and Lalonde spoke about Pius Suter during the post practice press conference, media availability, and because they asked him about Pius Suter, and he said, like, yeah, I talked to Pius Suter, and I think his role could be anywhere in the lineup. Like he can complement players on on the top six and the bottom six with the way he plays on the penalty kill, especially. But he also mentioned like center and wing. And when he said wing, I was like, that perked my ears. I mean, we've never really considered Pius Suter as a winger. We know he kind of struggles in the top six as a center. He's an effective bottom six center. He's on a little on the smaller size, and weight and in height, but like he can be effective. So the question is like, do you think that if you're adamant about Rasmussen and Veleno being center, that Suter could be a winger? We haven't really considered it because he did play center with the Chicago Blackhawks as well. In fact, he played big minutes at center the year that Jonathan Toews was injured. So it raises that question. But then, of course, you have Soderblom and Berggren are definitely trying to make a case to make the team. I think Berggren's very close to being like everyday NHL ready. Soderblom is a little bit more of a wild card. He's been playing really well, and they've been adamant about giving him minutes in the top six in the preseason. So, I mean, those guys are hot on the heels of a lot of NHLers on this roster. But, like, it's going to be really interesting as to where Veleno, Rasmussen, and Suter fall, because Copp was back in this practice. That's something we haven't really mentioned. We kind of glossed over. Copp was practicing on the second line, and that Derek Lalonde did speak on Copp's.
Didn't wear no contact either. He was
So
full
he'll be available soon, and Lalonde spoke on that, and I'll get to that in the second segment. But those three centers, I mean, I know Veleno is waiver eligible or waiver exempt rather, so he could be sent down. But honestly, with the way he's playing in preseason, I don't care. I don't want him sent down just because he's available to be sent down. I think he's outplaying some of his colleagues, coworkers, teammates. That's the word. That's the word for sports. Teammates.
I mean, yeah, no, I think that it is more of leaning towards what an audition is than it is like, oh, this is going to happen. Like I think when I look at this, I go, okay, this team wants, because it's a good problem to have as many
Oh, it's
centers
great.
as possible. Like that is what you want. You want as many of your forwards as possible to be able to play center, especially when looking at the last 2 years. Like center depth has been a massive problem. So of all teams, like this is one that is desperately trying to develop homegrown talent at the center position. And so I think that they are trying to do that very, I don't want to say desperately, but like very apparently. And so I think it's just more of that. They want to give as much playing time and as much situationalness. That's
Yeah.
not a word.
Situations.
They want to put them in as many situations as possible where they can succeed as centers. And so I think it's more of that. And again, it's an off day practice in the preseason. Like I think it's just trying to get a really solid look. Like we know what Pius Suter is. Pius Suter's not surprising anyone. Pius Suter's not going to randomly become something he's not. And and in the same breath, I don't think he's going to completely like fall off the table and crash and burn either. Like I think we have a decent gauge and a decent range of what Pius Suter is going to be for the team this year. Whereas the younger guys, especially the younger guys that you think have a possibility of playing center, you want to give them a chance to prove if they can play center or not. So I really think that's all it is. I don't think it's like, oh well, look, we're losing faith, and no, like we just want to get some looks at some dudes.
Yeah, that's fair. We really got to go to an ad break here. We got to still talk about the defensive line pairings. So we didn't even talk about that. There were 4 defensive pairings. But first, I got to talk to you guys about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Segment 2, Lockdown Red Wings podcast, the defensive pairings at practice, were pretty much what you'd expect out of the first 3. There's not as deep of a conversation to be had here. It was Sherratt, Seider, Mata, Hronek, Edvinsson, Lindstrom, Oosterley, and Kampfer. And I guess really the conversation is on that bottom pair because we talked yesterday about whether or not Lindstrom could even make the team because he's not really performing all that well in preseason by our eye test or even by, shooting metrics either. He was dead worse on the team on a game where the Red Wings dominated against the Pittsburgh Penguins, lost, but dominated. So you have Oosterley and Kampfer, and Oosterley has been, Oosterley. I've been saying Oosterley. Oosterley has been a 7th defenseman pretty much his entire career, but is, can fill that role as an NHL defenseman. You got Steven Kampfer, who has been actually playing decently in preseason. So you got to wonder, could that be your bottom pairing? And I as I say that, I'm leaning towards no, which makes me think that with the more and more I talk about it, the more and more I'm kind of like, Edvinsson might just make the NHL because of a lack of competition rather than like a lot of competition. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, well, that's kind of what we were talking about over the last couple of days and yesterday. I think it's the forward competition is more of like comparing if you were to go into the mind of one of the forwards that was a fringe roster spot, it would be like, okay, I know that it is directly caused by my play. I need to outplay other people. Like we have a decent amount of depth now for the first time. Well, we have more depth than we've had on this team in a while. I'll put it that way. And there are some dudes that probably would make NHL rosters on other teams that are not going to make this NHL roster straight out of camp. Not a ton, and I'm not saying that we're going to be sending out all-star talent, but like for the first time in a while, there's dudes you look at and you're like, hey, like I would have liked to have seen him get a shot or whatnot. Defensively, it's really just everybody that's a fringe candidate compared to Simon Edvinsson. Like that's it.
Yeah.
There's no competition between like dudes that are going to get healthy and like, oh, like who's going to be the depth. It's like, no, it's like, is Edvinsson ready? And like all the other decisions are kind of based off of what happens with Edvinsson. So like, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that it's a lot different of not necessarily a mindset because like you're trying to play your hardest, you're a professional athlete, whatever. But I think it's a lot more of a just kind of based around one person, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Well, because if I'm being honest too, I don't think Edvinsson is 100% ready yet. He doesn't, Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond came into preseason last year and they looked like they were just ready. Edvinsson still shows moments where he's not quite 100% adjusted yet. And why would he be? He's never played on North American ice before. It's smaller. But when you compare him to other guys like Osterley and Kampfer, who are the other healthy defensemen right now, I think that he still is, even with gaffes here and there, I still think he is outperforming those guys.
Yeah,
So
and
I
that's
think that,
we're not rebuilding anymore. This is
yeah,
not like, oh, we need to do everything to help. Like obviously you don't want to stunt development in players, but like, oh, we need to do everything that's just best for the young guys, and we're just gonna bring up, the stopgap players and the plug a hole players. Like, no, this is now at the point where the best player for every position in every line and pairing should make the NHL roster. So ready or not,
here he
if
comes.
if he okay, ready or not, like if he's, you know what I mean, like if he's the best player, the best defenseman left when you get to whatever the third pairing, then that's where the
Well,
conversation ends, and like
and he'll
that's
learn
where,
fast.
right, and like that's what's gonna happen, and that's who they're gonna pick. Like there's no more of this, oh, we have to, we're gonna go around like rookie contracts and like makes somebody eligible longer or
Yeah, no
whatever
more
at the
entry
end of the
level
season,
slides.
call somebody up and all this stuff. It's just like we're trying to win now. So it's who is the best player there. So even if he's not, 100% NHL ready. Well, if he's too good for Grand Rapids and he's the best player left when you've already named 5 defensemen on the team, then like there you go. He's going to be an NHL player on opening night.
Yeah, I mean that's just the long and short of it. I mean, if Mark Pysyk was healthy, if Jake Wollman was healthy, it might be a different story. He might have more competition and start the season in Grand Rapids.
You could
But
have said the same thing about Raymond last year. If
oh
Arana
yeah,
was healthy, does Raymond make the roster out of camp? It's a much different conversation.
yeah. So here we are. That's really the conversation on those practice lines. And again, like you were saying, Scotty, in segment one, they're just practice lines. They're very much just trying things out and seeing what works. But when it comes to that third offensive line of Veleno, Zadina, and Kubalik, I really like that. I thought Kubalik and Zadina have great chemistry, and Veleno's a very good passing center. So I think that with those two shooters, Kubalik especially, that could work really well as an effective third line. But we got to move on because these episodes are only so long and we're already halfway through it. Lalonde spoke after the practice media availability. The first thing I want to get to is Andrew Copp. They asked him about Andrew Copp because, as you noted in segment one, he was not wearing a non-contact jersey. He was wearing a normal jersey, and that he was on the center line, centering the second line. And when asked about Andrew Copp, they said, we're going to take it day by day. Our goal has always been opening night, next Friday on the 14th, but it could come sooner than that, but don't expect it. He says probably not, but he could play Friday, but probably not. He was doing that kind of sitting on the fence. So if he's ready Friday, we'll play him. And it is possible, but probably not. So it's you're kind of giving us two answers there, but I get it because you don't want to give us expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like if this is his only injury of the season, he's going to play 79, 80 games. It doesn't look like it's going to be a big thing. He might not be ready opening night, and that's pretty much the extent of worry that we've heard out of anybody within the organization. So
it sounds like he's really
definitely
close, though.
Yeah, well, and he's already he's already non-contact. He's what, a week behind, a week and a half behind everybody else. That's really all he's at right now. So
yeah, absolutely. He also mentioned they also asked him about Philip Zadina because they noted that on the 6-on-5 situation when they pulled the goalie last night, Philip Zadina was out there, and they asked him the mentality, and goes, "Whatever player gives us the best chance to win." It's basically what he said. Because they asked him, or he said, is it based on hot hand or just based on who's got the most talent? And he gave an answer that basically said it's both. players that give you the best chance to win sometimes are the players with the hot hand. Like they gave Adam Ernie opportunities on the power play after he had a 2-goal night in the preseason. So Zadina as the extra man, Zadina's been playing really well in the preseason. They wanted to see if as an extra man he could produce something. So I thought that was interesting as well, or not interesting, but I thought that was of note as well that Philip Zadina is getting looks at lots of different opportunities as they think he is capable of more. You're right. Interesting is a crutch word. It
doesn't
mean
anything.
Word. It forced me to extrapolate more on that point.
Well, that's good. That's what we want.
It is what we want. Well, I don't know. Some listeners probably not, but you at least pretend that you do.
No, certainly not.
They also asked him about process versus outcome. He said that last night was a game where the team was really dejected after the loss. And when he came back into the locker room, he was taken aback by how dejected they were after a preseason game. And he said it. He's like, let's face it, preseason games don't mean a whole lot. But when he came in the locker room and they were dejected almost as if they had lost a playoff game, he was motivated by the fact that the team took a preseason game, exhibition game, that seriously. And that shows just how driven and motivated that team is. And I absolutely love that because we saw it on the ice. We noted it in yesterday's episode, how hard that team fought.
It got chippy.
For a preseason game.
It got chippy, man. And I know it's like crazy. It's Chicago too, but like, it got chippy, man.
Yeah, but it being Chicago doesn't mean anything to these players.
Not to the players, no, yeah. But like, it's not like it was a empty crowd like in 2020. Like, they don't like us.
Yeah, right. They definitely don't. Chicago fans, we don't like each other. The fan bases don't like each other, but the teams that haven't played in the same division in like 10 years.
Like, I think games tend to get a little more chippy and more aggressive when the crowd's into it. And I'm not saying it was a playoff atmosphere or anything, but no, even besides that, like there were some hits that people didn't like. It was certainly a little bit of a chippier game than you're used to in the preseason, which is like awesome. I love, nobody get hurt, please, for the love of everything, but like, I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. And so he also said that, this is why he focuses on process rather than outcome. He says most nights they win that game. He says more times than not, they're going to win that game. He says there was a lot to like in that game with the process. I mean, they outchanced the Pittsburgh Penguins and by all means outplayed the Pittsburgh Penguins in that game, but they just came up short, which is why he focuses on the process. He says, if we keep doing those things and we keep doing those things right, eventually you're going to score on the breakaways. You're going to score on the odd man rushes. So he described himself as a guy who focuses on process rather than outcome, but also as an optimist, which I thought was interesting. One, first of all, Lalonde is very open, which is a really nice change of pace because we both are so used to Jeff Blashill, who's very like Yzerman, kept things close to the chest, never really said much. But Lalonde is pretty much like, yeah, I'm an optimist. There were times in Tampa Bay where I had to have, John Cooper or the other assistant coaches, splash water on my face and be like, well, there were definitely things they had to work on because he describes himself as an optimist. He would always focus on the positives only, not so much the negatives. So I think it was interesting, the dynamic that's going to happen where you have a head coach come in here who's always focusing on the positives. And that, when he says that, it kind of comes across in his interviews, he's always thinking about like how excited he is to be a head coach and what there is to look forward to with the Red Wings, which partly is because, of course you're going to say those things when you're first time head coach, but I could see him definitely being as an optimist. I can see that as being a good thing. Now, I think optimism when a team's playing really poorly won't resonate with the team because the team can recognize the team's playing poorly, but I think that does a lot to keep morale and spirits high.
For sure. I mean, like we heard when he got hired, we heard how much of a player's coach he was and how much like everybody that had ever played for him or that commented on it, that, how much they liked him and how much they loved his mindset toward the game and everything. Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that keeps getting brought up, they've talked to Larkin about it, right? There's that clip on Bally where like they're interviewing Larkin about Lalonde and like they talked about Raymond now, or they talked to Raymond about it now. And like the thing that keeps coming up is and Larkin said it a lot and he was like, yeah, it's just like simple. And it's like, he's like not simple in like a bad way. Like not, it's too simplistic or whatever. Like it's creative, but it is like, when you talk to Lalonde, it just seems like with the Zadina comment, he was like, yeah, like you're just going to go with the player that gives us the best chance. I don't know. Like it's not some crazy rocket science thing. I thought Zadina gave us the best chance to win. So like that's the direction I went. And like that's what when it comes to pushing pace and zone entry and stuff, that's what Larkin was like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward stuff and it works well for us. And I thought, it's gonna be fun this year. And like that's the in a positive connotation, like that's simple can be a good thing.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned zone entries and retrievals there, and that is something that Lalonde spoke about again. Is he's like, as a coach, like my philosophy is all on zone entries and retrievals. He's like, if you can enter the zone well and retrieve well, then like the zone presence and setting up in the zone is going to come after that. And I just love that because that's something we didn't see with under Blashill. Zone
Given the
entries and
last 4
retrievals.
years of zone entry, I don't even know if I can say we
Yeah.
had zone entry. Like it basically wasn't a thing on the team. Yeah, no, I think that's really refreshing to hear. At least we'll
definitely
see how it works in the regular season, but
we're definitely in a honeymoon phase with Derek Lalonde right now. It feels like everything he says just makes sense. And of course,
yeah.
we've gone through that with other people, but we'll see when the regular season starts how well the team can apply this structure he brings to the team. But we're already almost done with the episode. We haven't even talked about the Dylan Larkin contract thing, so we're gonna have to be quick about this. But Matthew Barzal of the New York Islanders signed a shiny new contract with the Islanders, and it's 8 years, 9.150 every single year. It's the same number every single year, 9.15. Now, Matthew Barzal has 311 points in 362 games played. 220 of those are assists, only 91 are goals. Now, Dylan Larkin, by comparison, has 504 games played, so about 140 more games played, 358 points, so about 47 more points in his career. So Matthew Barzal is outpacing Dylan Larkin in points per game, but Dylan Larkin is more of a goal scorer than a playmaker. In fact, he has about 50 more goals than Matthew Barzal does. So it's a little bit different in terms of how they produce their points, but their point production is about the same, although Barzal does have the edge in point per game. So I think there's a very good comparison here in terms of point production and term. And we predicted when we were talking about these extensions a couple weeks ago that Larkin could get somewhere between 8.5 and 9.5. Well, if Barzal's getting more points or about the same amount of production in less games as Larkin, I think Larkin's contract probably is still going to look around that range that we predicted, 8.5, 9.5, around 8 years.
Yeah, I don't think this really changes my opinion too terribly much on what I expect Larkin to get contract-wise. I think when you are comparing those two as well, like it's hard. They've had very different like career arcs and like very different situations and like injury stuff and whatnot. Like there's very I don't know. I don't think just doing straight up like how many points and how many games really does it justice. Like Larkin's when he first entered the league was a different team in a different situation, and like 2018 to 2020 was like something that not very many players in the league have ever had to be in that situation. Like I don't know. Like it's just his career arc, I think, is very unique and a lot different than
he's played on a better Islanders team than Larkin has played on a Red Wings team.
Right. And I mean, and just comparing like last season, like Larkin just turned 25 like last year, and just looking at the great season that he had last year and, before the injury, what he was doing and whatnot. I don't know. I think that it's just a different situation. So I think it's hard to compare more so than just like, oh, look how many points and how many games. But in the same breath, I really, like I said, I don't really expect too much I don't expect my opinion on how much Larkin's going to get paid to change at all because of this. And like every contract that happens, period, is like something to look at and be like, oh, like, with this looming, like, let's take this into account. But I don't think this one really moves the needle any direction for me. I still think it's going to be somewhere between 8.5 to 9.5 AAV.
Yeah, I mean, I think this more or less just solidifies that that's probably the range that Larkin's going to get. Now, Larkin's a goal scorer. Barzal's more of a playmaker. Like we've established that and we know that, but just pure point production wise. And I know you said it's hard to compare those two because of the different teams that they play on. But I mean, if you had to come down to it and compare, I think that, Larkin's probably going to get something around the same number. Somebody added us on Twitter and said Larkin's going to get around 10 because of this contract. And I don't think that's safe to say at all. If anything, Barzal's in one less year has been a more consistent player points wise, where Larkin's been a little bit more sporadic with his point production. But again, Larkin came into a team that was bottomed out, and then
right.
the
That's my
upswing.
point. Is
Well,
like
the
the
Islanders have been
situation
upwards.
the situation. Well, even
with the exception of last year, they were bad last year.
right, for sure. Even I mean, the team, the like front office changes, like coaching changes, line changes. I mean, like how how old he was, the injuries that happened, like literally everything. Like
Well,
he's had a heck of a career already, just in the terminology of like how much stuff has already been kind of piled into this 7 years already.
so the 2018 Stanley Cup was the Washington Capitals, and that
Yep.
was Barry Trotz's. And then so 18-19 season was the first year with the Islanders for Barry Trotz. Barzal in his rookie season was actually his best season points wise. He had 85 points in 82 games, over a point per game, 22 goals, 63 assists. He's never eclipsed 30 goals in his career. Not that matters. That's not the end all be all. But his point production has never been the same after that. Barry Trotz also preaches a lot more of a defensive game. He's a defensive mindset head coach in my opinion. And so, his point totals came a bit down lower to 62, 60, 45, 59, but they also made the playoffs for 3 straight years after Barry Trotz came in and started preaching this more defensive-minded style. So he's been consistently a 50 or 60 point production player his entire career, with the exception of his rookie year where he got 85 points. It's very consistent. But I'm digressing at this point.
No. I just like the biggest point that I really want, the way I want to iterate this is like, I want to see Dylan Larkin being the best player on a good Red Wings team. Like, that has not happened yet. Like, that has not, like, he's been the best player on the team for a lot of these years, right? Especially like the bottoming and out years and everything. But like, I want to see Dylan Larkin be the 1C for a full healthy year on a Red Wings team that is actually like somewhat decent.
Yeah.
And that has not happened yet in his entire career. So.
Completely agree. One final thing of note, and doesn't really even have to be a conversation, but the Vancouver Canucks have released Danny DeKeyser from his professional tryout. And I have to imagine that that's probably it for his NHL career. He might get an AHL contract if he chooses to pursue further professional. But I mean, and this isn't a shot at Danny DeKeyser whatsoever. I love Danny in his tenure here, but I mean, you got to imagine it's probably it for him.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I don't know. It depends on how badly he wants to play. I mean, if he can find an opportunity not in the NHL, like some dudes do that, right?
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of dudes retire from the NHL or not get contracts in the NHL and then go play elsewhere or whatever. And it's a little different because
he's got a family and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like, he's kind of like home based here now at this point. So we'll see. But yeah, if it is, if he does like retire, we'll do a whole segment on that. I'm sure we'll break that down a lot more. We're gonna have to jump the gun on that. But yeah, definitely looking like it.
Either way, good luck, Danny DeKeyser. Whatever comes your way next, man. Any final thoughts, dude?
I don't think so, man. We ball. I'm about to watch like 7 straight hours of baseball, so I got some coffee. I literally bought coffee.
If this was the Braves or the Mets or the Giants, I'd say have fun. But to this, I'll say,
hey, this game
survive.
means something to the Mariners, and that's at least gives me a little bit of something to like keep an eye on. This is like they're fighting for playoff seeding and like who they play in the first round and everything. So,
all right, bud. We'll catch you guys later. Same time, same place. It's your team
every day.
Every day.
BetOnline,